Okay, so essentially I want to break this down into a how to, what to use, and where to fish them type of video, as well as adding in my favorite launches. So if you're a pro at fishing the Detroit River, you don't need to be told where to go or how to catch them. You don't need to watch it, but feel free to watch it and critique me all you like. I'm just sharing information, knowledge that I've gained over the years of fishing there that will hopefully help some people get on some fish out there without being made fun of in other social media platforms. So let's dive right in to starting with location of fish. So it's no secret that the Detroit River is a mecca breeding ground for walleye coming from Lake Erie. Some of those walleye also coming from Lake St. Clair. Now that is a debatable topic, whether they go upstream to spawn or not. I believe they do, but I also believe some of those fish from Lake St. Clair come into the Detroit River, as well as just resident fish that live there all year round. So there's a lot of things to consider when you're going to go target fish on the Detroit River. Number one, water temperature and clarity. Clarity can be a big issue, especially early on the Canadian side, which can spill over to the American side, making the water dirty and at times virtually unfishable. Okay, so now starting at the south end of the river, down towards the mouth of Lake Erie. These are the areas guys are going to start poking around first to get them initial pre-spawners that are coming up. The fish are coming up river. I mean, you can look at the map, mouth of Lake Erie, and follow the Detroit River up. Now, one of the best spots to start in is along that Trenton Channel. Guys really like fishing along that Trenton Channel, and not only starting, but fishing the entire season. One thing you got to be aware of with the Trenton Channel is there's a lot of snags. There's a lot of snags through there along BASF, which is right below the Wyandotte launch and the golf course there. You can really get tied up into a lot of snags. Moving up the river along the steel mill, along River Rouge, which is located near Bellinger Park Ramp. Bellinger Park Ramp is located really right near two of my favorite fishing spots, River Rouge and the steel mill. It's all kind of one area right there. Moving back down south, you're looking at like Wyandotte Launch or even Lake Erie Metro Park is another launch you can use to launch your boat to get into the river. So then you got Bellinger Park, which is kind of mid-river. You go up, you got Delray, which is a little bit further north of mid-river. And then you move north. I believe there's another launch in between Delray and St. Jean, but I'm not aware of it. I've never launched there. So just keep that in mind. Full disclosure, never launched there. But as you move north of Bellinger toward Delray, you have a few good fishing spots there. The Ambassador Bridge, which is a phenomenal fishing spot, both sides. Now, guys, I'm talking both sides of the river, Canadian and American side. Some days, depending on the water clarity, the Canadian side's better. More times than not, the Canadian side's better. And as you move north from there, you've got the post office, you've got the Rensen, the GM Ren Center, and the Princess boat, which is right there, drifting right along there, along them buoys is good, all the way up to the Belle Isle Bridge. Now, the Belle Isle Bridge is the spot that I like to fish early season. A lot of local fish will be staged up there, fish that are just resident fish from the river that wintered over in the river. And that's a good spot to fish early season as well. Moving up towards the mouth of Lake St. Clair, if you shoot over to the Canadian side by Peach Island and check out them sand hills, that's another good spot. Also, another spot that's really dirty more times than not, but there's fish there. So now I'd like to talk about my favorite launch. But for me, Bellinger Park is my favorite launch. One thing I can tell you guys is when the launch opens, which I believe is 6 a.m., maybe 7, you have to check, maybe give them a call, check their hours, or call DipNet and talk to them about it. But get there an hour before it opens, because even though it opens at a certain time, guys, there'll be a lineup of cars or trucks with trailers getting ready to launch. And when the bite's on and you want to be one of the first ones, get there early, get all your gear ready, so that way when you're ready to launch, you can back the boat in, launch it, get out of everybody's way, and get out and get fishing. Now, when it comes to my number one spot to fish, when I launch, I'm running right to the Ambassador Bridge. I'm going to start there. I'm going to start right underneath of it, or just go up past it and then drift underneath of it. I've had my best trips right along that stretch from the Ambassador Bridge down to the Boblo Island boat docks. Some of my ultimate best trips out there, whether I was catching keeping or catching releasing, came from that exact spot. Now, the way I go about it is I try to position myself 50 to 75 yards off the edge of the riverbank. Anywhere in there is a good starting point if you're fishing in the morning. If you're fishing in the morning, the fish are going to be up a little bit more shallow. They're going to be up a little bit more shallow, and that's where they're going to want to spawn, is up in there shallow. And that's what the big females want to do. They're going to get up in there shallow to spawn, but you got to remember, walleye, their eyes, they don't handle light real well. So as the morning goes on, if it's a bright sunshiny day, you may, if you're not picking them up still, you may want to drift out towards, a little closer to the center of the river. Give that a shot and see if that works for you. Majority of the time, that's all it is. But that's right where I'm starting. If I'm not picking them up there, I'm going to move up to the Rensen, drift along that Princess, right through there, along the post office, all really good area. You can do some mega long drifts. You can do short and 100, 200 yard drifts, and then pull back up and drift over them if you're on a good active pot of fish. It's another way to do it. So a lot of these spots aren't going to be any type of secret. You're going to see the boats there. But one thing I can tell you is I learned over the last couple of years is if you're in the pack of boats and you're catching them and you don't want to deal with them all, don't be afraid just to cruise upstream of them a few hundred yards. More times than not, there's still going to be that amount of fish just upstream a little bit further. And there's been times I had a group of people on the boat, and I'll share a clip with you right here. We weren't around any boats. We were just upstream of where we started catching them just to get away from the pack of boats. And we were slaying them twice as good as we were in the pack of boats. So one thing to consider, don't be afraid to just poke around a little bit and maybe find a fresh pot of fish, or get off the pot of fish that's getting pressured with jigs bouncing on their head all morning long. I'm going to touch on the gear now. We'll start with as simple as the plastic. Lunker City makes a 4-inch split tail minnow. That's one of my favorite colors. That's Pimp Daddy. A really popular plastic is the Wyandotte worm. Now, color does matter a lot of times with walleye, dark or bright. I really like either black or chartreuse, or a combination of both, or blue and silver with a chartreuse tail works really good. So like right here you have the black ice, which is a really good one. And then the Bondi baits, this is really one of my favorites on all the river systems, not only Detroit, but Saginaw and St. Clair River, is the Bondi worm. And I like this in straight chartreuse. If you were just to go buy a couple bags of baits, this is what I would recommend. Now, when it comes to jig heads, you can go down the entire wormhole. As you can see here, I've got a ton of them. Some of my favorite, I get them from Wildy Jigs. He's always at the Ultimate Fishing Show. So I'll just pull one of them out here, and I'll show you guys how I rig them and why I rig them this way. So here's your 1-ounce jig head. It's color matching to the plastic, the finesse minnow. This is the Pimp Daddy. You're going to want to tie on here. And now, guys, 1-ounce jig heads. Just go, if you're fishing the Detroit River, just buy the 1-ounce jig heads. There's a lot of guys that, well, you don't need 1 ounce. I don't need 1 ounce. And I get it, man. If you fish it all the time and you're really good at vertical jigging and current, I get it. You may not need the 1 ounce. But for sake of argument, for sake of having to mess around buying a bunch of different jigs, just buy the 1 ounce. It's guaranteed to keep you vertical in the Detroit River better than any other weight jig head that's out there. So if you want to better your odds of catching fish, just buy the 1-ounce jig heads, and you're going to be happy with that. So 1-ounce jig heads, the 4-inch finesse minnow. Now, this is how I rig my stinger. Stinger hooks are a must. Let's just back up a little bit. Stinger hooks are a must. You got to have a stinger hook, because a lot of times them fish aren't even, they're attacking, but they're just coming up and they're inhaling a water, right? They come up. So a lot of times they're going to get that first. Now, when the bite's on, you're going to be catching a lot on the main hook. But I'm telling you guys, I've caught probably 75% of the fish just on the stinger, because that's free floating, and you want to keep it free floating. Some guys tie it down to the tail. You want to keep that free floating and have it right about there. If you want to tie your own, you can go a little longer, but then one thing you got to worry about is snagging up old dirty shop rags, any type of litter that's in the river, which there's tons of it. But that's one thing you got to watch out for, is having too long of a stinger. But I don't I don't tie mine down. I keep it free floating. That way when you're lifting that jig, that stinger is always just kind of dancing around down there. So if a walleye wants to come up and swipe at it, it's going to get the business end of that stinger. A little tip for you to help keep your stinger on, or if you're using minnows, take one of your pieces of plastic and use it as, you know, just designate it for cutting up little pieces like that, but just thread it over the hook and then tuck your, keep your stinger hook on there. Tuck it right up against your main plastic. Also, this works really well, like if you were to be fishing with a minnow, as well as your plastic, you can thread that on after your minnow, and that keeps your stinger hook, and it'll help keep your minnow on. So 1 ounce jig heads, guys. Don't forget that. As far as color, black, chartreuse, you know, does the color jig head matter? Some people say yes, some people say no. But man, when there's that many walleye in there, it doesn't really matter. I mean, there's times where there's so many walleye in there, you're actually belly snagging them, and it just goes to show you how many walleye are actually in there. Next, we're going to talk about rod and reel. A lot of people like the Denali rods. You know, you don't need to spend a fortune on a jig rod. I like the St. Croix rods. This is a 6.6, medium heavy, with a fast tip. So what I like about it is it's got a really springy tip, right? Really soft like tip for getting that extra feel. But this is nothing but backbone. So when you feel that bite, or you feel that initial weight of the fish when you're lifting up on your jig, you can load right into them and bring them up. I prefer like a 200 size spinning reel. This is a Daiwa. Again, guys, you don't need to get fancy. You don't need to get expensive with this type of stuff. I see on social media all over the place, you know, and I'm sure the equipment is hands down top notch. But if you're just looking to get out there and fish, you don't need to go all out. Just buy yourself a nice spinning rod and reel setup. And again, if you're on the boat, I like a shorter rod. I like a 6.6. Anything longer, you know, it can be kind of a pain. Now, this is personal preference. After years of fishing, I've learned about a 6.6 is perfect for me to run the trolling motor and be able to jig without having too much rod out there and fatiguing my jig arm. High-vis braid. High-vis braid is a must. Vertical jigging. Well, I'm not going to say a must, but for me it's a must. And why is it a must? It's because you can see your line. The whole key to vertical jigging is staying vertical, staying straight up and down. Now, there's a lot of guys that'll say, well, you don't need to be 100% vertical, and I get that. But when you're trying to do something like vertical jigging, the idea is to stay vertical. Because the longer you're not vertical, the longer that jig's drifting away from you or back behind you, and it's kind of just pissing in the wind, because now you're jigging like a pendulum, right? You're not necessarily straight up and down like the whole concept of vertical jigging is. And that goes back to the whole 1 ounce jig head thing. And again, guys, just buy the 1 ounce jig head. So high vis line, I use, so the way I do it is I tie a leader. I go, a lot of people say, you know, 8-10 pound braid, this, that. I just use straight up 30-pound braid, and I use a 12-pound fluorocarbon leader tied with the Alberto Knot. I did a video on the Alberto Knot. If you don't know what the Alberto Knot is, to me, it's the fastest, most efficient, never failed me braid to fluoro knot, and I can literally tie this thing. Once you learn it, you can tie it in a matter of a minute or two, and you'll be good to go. So I'll leave a link to that video in the description of this video if you guys want to learn how to tie the Alberto Knot. But I just run a nice long leader, probably about the length of the rod. That way, if I snag up, I can, you know, it'll bust off, and I can retie and still have some leader. Really, the length of your rod is more than enough for leader, but always use a leader, guys. That way, if you do snag up, because you're going to snag up on the Detroit River, that way you can bust it off and retying it back to fishing and not leave a bunch of braid in the river for somebody else to snag up on. I made that mistake before and felt like an ass about it. Okay, so I feel like I broke it down pretty good. Again, my favorite launch, Bellinger Park. My favorite spot to fish, right at the Ambassador Bridge or either side of it, a quarter mile. My favorite jig head, 1 ounce. That's going to get you as vertical as you possibly can be and not having to worry about your pendulum swinging. Anyways, so I haven't been able to get out due to weather, due to work. But I wanted to shoot this video for you guys that were actually asking me the questions about how I go about it, what to use, where to fish, type of thing. So hopefully this helps some of you guys that are new to fishing the river. We are all new at one time, so don't be afraid to ask the questions. If you have any more questions, leave them in the comments of this video, and I'll try my best to address them as quick as I can for you guys. Detroit River walleye season is weeks away, like 2 weeks before it's ready to fire on all cylinders. So get your questions to me. I'll try to answer them as fast as I can for you guys. If you haven't yet, subscribe to the channel. It's free to subscribe. You just hit the little subscribe button down below, hit the little bell, that way you're notified every time I upload a new video. I'm going to be hammering the walleye this spring. As you can see, I got my kayak behind me. I'm in a couple national events for kayak bass fishing this year, so I'm looking forward to that, and really looking forward to open water fishing this year. So thank you guys again for watching. Thanks for taking the time to watch the video. We'll see you on the next one.